If someone had told me that the only thing capable of shattering my ruthless facade was a positive pregnancy test bearing the air of my absolute worst enemy, I would have destroyed them on the spot. Welcome to your BL boyfriend. Before we dive into this intense story of fierce rivalry, hidden secrets, and an unexpected twist of fate, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and comment down below if you're excited. It really helps your BL boyfriend grow and lets me know you want more of this story. Part 1. The Scent of Betrayal. I was Julian Thorne, the ruthless, untouchable alpha CEO of Thorne Industries. In the corporate world, my name was synonymous with absolute power, unyielding control, and cold calculation. I had built my empire from the ground up, crushing anyone who dared to stand in my way, navigating the cutthroat corporate landscape with a precision that left my rivals bankrupt and broken. I was a predator in a world of prey, and my pheromones, a sharp, intimidating blend of winter frost and dark cedar, demanded absolute respect and submission the moment I walked into any room. Alphas bowed, betas hurried out of my path, and omegas didn't even dare to meet my gaze. My life was perfectly ordered, fiercely guarded, and completely under my command. But today, my own body was betraying me in the most humiliating way possible. I stood at the head of the massive Obsidian conference table, projecting my quarterly earnings presentation to a room full of impatient, greedy stakeholders. I was supposed to be finalizing a hostile takeover of a rival tech firm, a move that would solidify my complete dominance in the international market. I had done this 1,000 times. The numbers were perfect, my strategy was flawless. But as I confidently flipped to the next slide, a sudden, violent wave of dizziness hit me so hard the room spun. I gripped the edges of the wooden podium, my knuckles turning white as I desperately tried to anchor myself. The bold, black text on the projection screen blurred into a meaningless gray smudge. My throat felt incredibly dry, like I had swallowed sand, yet a strange, suffocating heat was rising from the center of my chest, flushing my skin. Mr. Thorne, one of the board members, a stubborn, traditionalist older alpha named Harrison, asked, his thick brow furrowed in suspicion. Are you quite all right? You look exceptionally pale. I am perfectly fine, I snapped automatically, though my voice lacked its usual commanding, icy bite. It sounded breathless. Weak. But I wasn't fine. Something was horribly, fundamentally wrong. The air in the expansive boardroom was growing thick, heavy with a scent I didn't recognize. Or rather, a scent I utterly refused to recognize. My usually dominant, oppressive pheromones were unraveling right out of my control. The sharp bite of winter frost was twisting into something undeniably soft, impossibly sweet, and dangerously vulnerable. It smelled like crushed orchids soaked in warm honey, the distinct, undeniable scent of a distressed omega. Or worse, an alpha whose biology had been completely subverted. The reaction in the room was immediate and chaotic. Several beta executives shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, exchanging bewildered, frantic glances. Harrison, the older alpha, visibly recoiled, pinching the bridge of his nose as the overwhelmingly sweet scent flooded the state-of-the-art ventilation system. Julian, Harrison said, his tone dropping its professional edge, replaced by a mixture of shock and disgust. Your scent, you are leaking. Profusely. What in the world is going on with you? This is highly inappropriate for a boardroom. Panic, cold, sharp, and primal, pierced through my chest. An alpha losing control of their scent in a high-stakes corporate environment was absolute career suicide. It was a blatant sign of weakness, of biological instability. If the market caught wind of this, Thorne Industries stock would plummet before the market closed. I swallowed hard, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, trying to rein in my biology through sheer force of will. But the nauseating sweetness only intensified, coating the back of my throat. Then came the physical sickness. My stomach lurched violently, a wave of pure nausea crashing over me. The expensive, dark roast espresso I had drank earlier threatened to make a violent reappearance. I couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. This meeting is adjourned. I gasped out abruptly, not waiting for a single response or allowing room for argument. I turned on my heel and practically fled the conference room, ignoring the shocked, outraged murmurs and the sound of chairs scraping against the floor erupting behind me. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, striding down the executive hallway with a frantic urgency. Mr. Thorne. Sir, the takeover papers. My panicked assistant called out, chasing after me with a stack of folders. Cancel everything for the rest of the week. I barked without looking back. I slammed the heavy mahogany door to my private office shut, locked the deadbolt, and barely made it to my private ensuite bathroom before collapsing over the cold marble sink. My chest heaved violently as I stared down the drain, trying to steady my racing heart. I turned the golden faucet, splashing freezing water onto my face. I stared at my reflection in the wide mirror. I looked like a ghost. My normally sharp, confident features were drawn and pale, my eyes wide with an unfamiliar, deeply buried terror. I tried to normalize my breathing, counting backward from 10, but the sickeningly sweet scent of orchids and honey clung to my skin like a permanent curse. This had never happened before. I was in peak physical condition. I had a team of dietitians and personal trainers. I controlled my biology with an iron fist. There was only one logical, scientific explanation for an alpha's body to undergo such a catastrophic, sudden hormonal shift. But it was impossible. It was a myth, a biological rarity that simply did not happen to people like me. My treacherous mind dragged me back, kicking and screaming, to exactly 3 months ago. The annual City Charity Gala. The forced, agonizing celebration of a joint venture I had been politically strong-armed into signing by the city's mayor. And the man sitting directly across the VIP table from me, nursing a glass of dark bourbon with a predatory smirk that always made me want to commit violence. Silas Vance, the Enigma CEO of Vance Global. The only man in the entire country more powerful, more feared, and more ruthlessly efficient than me. Silas was a living, breathing nightmare wrapped in a custom-tailored, midnight black Italian suit. His mere presence demanded absolute submission from everyone around him. While alphas commanded, enigmas conquered. They were the apex predators of our society, rare and overwhelmingly dominant. We despised each other. It was a rivalry that had defined the financial district for half a decade. We had fought tooth and nail over every government contract, every foreign acquisition, every square inch of the city's real estate. We traded insults like bullets. But that night at the gala, the bitter hatred had somehow twisted into something else entirely. Too much expensive, vintage champagne. Too many whispered, venomous threats disguised as polite corporate banter while the cameras flashed. The tension between us had always been volatile, a dangerous powder keg waiting for a single spark. And that night, alone in the VIP lounge after the guests had thinned out, it exploded. I remembered the heavy, suffocating weight of his Enigma pheromones, a scent like dark, burning smoke and expensive aged whiskey, wrapping around my senses, entirely paralyzing my alpha defenses. It was a total sensory overload. I remembered the fierce, bruised clash of our lips, the tearing of fabric, the total loss of my carefully maintained control. I remembered waking up the next morning in his sprawling, minimalist penthouse, the sun glaring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My body was aching in ways I had never experienced, my immense pride was completely shattered, and Silas was standing by the window, already dressed, smoking a cigarette as if he hadn't just completely dismantled his greatest rival. We hadn't spoken a word. I had gathered my clothes, walked out the door, and we silently agreed to bury the incident. It was a lapse in judgment, a collision of predatory, drunken instincts. Nothing more. But now, staring at my trembling hands gripping the edges of the bathroom sink, the terrifying, world-shattering truth began to claw its way into my logical mind. Enigmas possessed a unique, terrifyingly potent biology. They were the only secondary gender in existence strictly capable of causing a dominant alpha to conceive. No, I whispered to the empty, quiet bathroom, my voice shaking so badly it barely sounded like me. No, no, no. Absolutely not. I grabbed my dark wool coat and slipped out of the building through the private underground executive garage, avoiding my staff entirely. Within 20 agonizing minutes of reckless driving, I was sitting in the sterile, heavily soundproofed examination room of Dr. Eris. He was a highly discreet, incredibly expensive physician who catered exclusively to the city's elite, fixing scandals before they ever hit the tabloids. I paced the pristine white floor like a caged, feral animal while Dr. Eris silently analyzed the rapid blood sample he had just taken. The silence in the clinical room was absolutely deafening. Every second that ticked by on the wall clock felt like a physical, heavy blow to my ribs. "Julian, please sit down," Dr. Eris said kindly, his voice breaking the tense silence as he finally looked up from his glowing monitor. "Just give me the damn results, Eris," I demanded harshly, crossing my arms defensively over my chest to hide the slight, betraying tremor in my hands. "Is it a severe hormonal imbalance? Unprecedented stress? Tell me you can prescribe me some industrial-grade suppressants so I can get back to running my empire." Dr. Eris sighed heavily, taking off his silver-rimmed glasses and rubbing his eyes. He looked at me with an expression that instantly made my blood run freezing cold. It was deep, profound pity. It is not stress, Julian, and I absolutely cannot prescribe you suppressants. It would be incredibly dangerous, potentially fatal, in your current condition. My condition? I practically snarled, stepping closer to his desk. Spit it out before I buy this clinic and fire you. You are pregnant, Julian, Dr. Aris said quietly, his words dropping like atomic bombs into the quiet room. 10 weeks along, to be incredibly precise. Your alpha biology is currently fighting a massive internal war to adapt to the growing fetus, which is exactly why your pheromones are fluctuating so violently and out of your control. The sweet scent you are giving off is a deeply ingrained biological protective mechanism designed to shield the child. The world completely stopped spinning. The air vanished entirely from my lungs, leaving me suffocating. You're lying, I choked out, stumbling back a step as if he had physically struck me. I ran the advanced test twice to be absolutely certain, Aris replied gently, turning the monitor so I could see the undeniable, peaking graphs of my hormone levels. The data is undeniable. Julian, it is exceedingly, historically rare for an alpha to successfully carry a child. The only way this is biologically, physically possible is if the sire is an enigma. And given your highly prominent public status, I strongly, urgently advise you to inform the father immediately. A pregnancy of this complex nature requires the sire's specific enigma pheromones to stabilize the alpha carrier's nervous system. If you try to go through this incredibly taxing process alone, your body might completely reject the child, and it could be fatal for both of you. I couldn't hear his medical warnings anymore. A loud, high-pitched ringing filled my ears, drowning out his voice. Pregnant, by Silas Vance, the man who wanted nothing more than to see my life's work crumble into absolute dust. The man I had sworn on my life to destroy. I was carrying his heir inside of me. If Silas ever found out, he wouldn't just use this golden opportunity to humiliate me in the press. He would use it to legally and biologically take over my entire life. An enigma's possessive, territorial instincts over their offspring and their chosen mate were legendary, described in medical journals as almost primal and violently protective. He would lock me away in a gilded cage, legally claim Thorn Industries while I was incapacitated, and treat me like nothing more than a fragile, precious incubator. No one can ever know about this, I whispered, my voice suddenly entirely devoid of emotion, a terrifying calm washing over my panic. I looked up at Aris, my icy blue eyes blazing with a desperate, lethal fire. Do you hear me, Aris? This information does not leave this room, not even in your encrypted files. If a single whisper of this leaks to the press or to Vance Global, I will utterly ruin you. I will erase you. Julian, you have to be reasonable. Aris pleaded, standing up. You cannot hide something of this magnitude forever. Within a month, the physical bodily changes will be noticeable to anyone paying attention. Your scent is already completely out of your control. I will handle it, I stated coldly, turning sharply toward the heavy door. I always handle it. I left the private clinic in a total, numbing daze, the bright afternoon city lights blurring outside the tinted windows of my luxury car. My brilliant, strategic mind was racing a mile a minute, calculating odds, plotting maneuvers, desperately trying to find an escape route from this biological prison. I would step down temporarily. Yes, that was it. I would tell the board of directors I was taking an indefinite sabbatical for severe exhaustion. I would quietly move to one of my private, heavily guarded estates overseas, have the child in total secrecy, and then what? Give it up to a prestigious adoption agency. Keep it a secret from the world forever? Keep it a secret from the most powerful man in the city? I placed a trembling, hesitant hand over my perfectly flat stomach, hidden beneath my expensive tailored vest. A child. Silas's child. My heart gave a strange, painful, fluttering ache that I immediately and ruthlessly forced down. There was absolutely no room for weakness or sentimentality. This was a crisis, a hostile biological takeover, and I had to manage it like a CEO. By the time I finally reached the private elevator of my luxury penthouse, the sun had set, and I was physically and emotionally drained to the point of collapse. All I wanted was to crawl into my massive, empty bed, pull the covers over my head, and pretend the last 4 hours had been a stress-induced hallucination. I unlocked the heavy double doors and stepped into the grand, marble-floored foyer of my apartment. It was pitch black, silent except for the faint, distant hum of the city traffic hundreds of feet below. I reached out blindly for the elegant brass light switch on the wall. You're home exceptionally late, Julian. The voice came from the deep darkness of my expansive living room. Deep, resonant, gravelly, and dripping with an absolute, terrifying authority that made all the tiny hairs on the back of my neck stand up in instant alarm. I froze completely. My hand hovered paralyzed over the light switch. My breath hitched in my throat. The heavy, intoxicating, violently familiar scent of dark smoke and aged whiskey rolled over me in a massive wave. It instantly, almost magically, calmed the chaotic, twisting nausea in my stomach, settling my racing pulse, but simultaneously sending a massive spike of pure, unadulterated terror straight through my veins. A single, dim reading lamp flicked on in the far corner of the massive room. Silas Vance was sitting dead center in my custom, imported leather armchair, one long leg crossed elegantly over the other. He looked immaculate, dangerous, and perfectly at ease in my home. His sharp, unforgiving jawline was set in stone, and his dark, piercing eyes were fixed entirely on me with a terrifying, predatory intensity that pinned me to the spot. Silas! I breathed out, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I tried to summon my alpha command, but my voice wavered. What the hell are you doing in my apartment? He didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, savoring my obvious panic. He stood up slowly, uncoiling his massive frame, towering over me even from 30 feet away. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his dark eyes narrowing slightly as he took a deep, slow breath, tasting the air of the room. I realized with absolute horror exactly what he was doing. He was smelling me, my suppressed orchids and honey scent, which I had desperately tried to scrub off in the clinic's bathroom, was instantly flaring up again in full force, reacting violently and instinctively to the overwhelming presence of its enigma sire. Silas's expression shifted drastically. The usual, arrogant, mocking smirk that I hated so much completely vanished, replaced instantly by an expression that was incredibly dark, ancient, violently possessive, and impossibly dangerous. He crossed the massive expanse of the living room in 3 long, predatory strides, stopping mere inches from my face. I desperately tried to step back, to create distance, but my legs felt like lead. My biology was completely submitting to his proximity. He reached out, his large, incredibly warm hand gripping my chin firmly, tilting my pale face up to meet his intense, burning gaze. His thumb brushed over my lower lip. "You smell entirely different today, Julian," Silas whispered, his deep voice dropping to a dangerously soft, rumbling purr that vibrated in my chest. "You smell exactly like you're hiding something that already belongs to me." End of Part 1. Part 2, The Enigma's Claim. The silence in my expansive penthouse was suddenly deafening, broken only by the ragged, uneven sound of my own breathing. Silas Vance's large, calloused hand was still gripping my chin, his thumb resting dangerously close to my lower lip. The sheer physical heat radiating from him was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the cold, clinical panic freezing my veins. His dark eyes, usually completely unreadable, were now swirling with a tempest of confusion, suspicion, and a dark, primal instinct that terrified me to my very core. "Take your hands off me, Vance," I hissed, my voice trembling despite my desperate attempt to inject it with my usual alpha venom. I violently jerked my head away from his grip, taking a stumbling step backward until my spine hit the cold, solid mahogany of the foyer console table. Silas didn't move. He simply stood there in the dim light of the single lamp, a towering monument of enigma dominance. He didn't look offended by my rejection. Instead, his gaze tracked my every movement like a predator watching a cornered, wounded animal. "You didn't answer my question, Julian," Silas said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate straight through the floorboards and into the soles of my shoes. He took a slow, deliberate half-step toward me, completely invading my personal space. The suffocating, intoxicating scent of dark smoke and aged whiskey washed over me again. "Why does the most ruthless alpha in the financial district currently smell like crushed orchids and honey? You smell soft. You smell biological." "I am ill," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I crossed my arms tightly over my chest, a subconscious, pathetic attempt to shield my perfectly flat stomach from his piercing gaze. "I contracted a severe viral infection during my trip to Tokyo last week. It's temporarily messing with my hormone receptors and pheromone production. Now, unless you are here to negotiate the Silicon Valley merger, I suggest you get out of my home before I call my security team and have you forcefully removed for breaking and entering." It was a good lie. It was logical, calculated, and delivered with as much icy contempt as I could muster. For a normal alpha or beta, it might have been enough to make them back down. But Silas was an enigma. A slow, dark, utterly terrifying smirk spread across Silas's handsome face. He chuckled, a deep, hollow sound that held absolutely no humor. "Call them," Silas challenged softly, crossing his arms over his broad chest. The tailored fabric of his midnight black suit strained against his muscles. "Call your security, Julian. Let them walk in here and smell their untouchable, terrifying CO reeking of sweet submission. Let them see you trembling. I'm sure Thorn Industries' stock price will handle the rumor mill perfectly tomorrow morning." I gritted my teeth, my jaw aching from the pressure. He had me cornered, and he knew it. My security team was fiercely loyal, but in the corporate world, blood was in the water the second weakness was detected. If my guards smelled this omega-like scent on me, the whispers would start. And whispers destroyed empires. "What do you want, Silas?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, exhausted whisper. "You broke into my private residence. You bypassed state-of-the-art security. You are standing in my foyer demanding answers about my personal health. Name your price or state your business, and then leave." Silas dropped his arms, the predatory amusement vanishing from his face as quickly as it had appeared. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the air growing impossibly heavy. "I came here," Silas began, his voice dangerously even, "because for the last 3 days, every single time I tried to close my eyes, my instincts have been tearing me apart from the inside out. I haven't slept. I haven't been able to focus on my board meetings. My enigma biology has been screaming at me, dragging me across the city to this exact building, to this exact room." He took another step forward, closing the distance until our chests were mere inches apart. I had nowhere left to run. And now that I am standing in front of you, Julian, my instincts are finally quiet. Because they found exactly what they were looking for. My breath hitched. "You're insane. You're experiencing phantom pheromone syndrome, likely from stress." "Do not insult my intelligence," Silas interrupted, his voice cracking like a whip in the quiet room. His eyes darted down, his gaze landing directly on the pocket of my dark wool coat, which was still draped over my arm. In my blind panic leaving Dr. Eris's clinic, I hadn't shredded the medical report. The thick, embossed envelope with the clinic seal was sticking out just an inch from the inner pocket. Before my exhausted, pregnant body could even react, Silas moved with terrifying speed. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with an iron grip to keep me in place, while his other hand reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the crisp white envelope. "No!" I shouted, the facade of the cold CEO completely shattering. Pure, unadulterated panic clawed its way up my throat. I thrashed wildly, trying to rip my wrist from his grip, trying to snatch the envelope back. "Give that back. That is private medical property, Vance. You have no right. Stop fighting me, Julian. You're going to hurt yourself," Silas ordered, his voice suddenly thick with a strange, heavy concern that only fueled my panic further. He effortlessly held both of my wrists in one of his massive hands, pinning them gently but immovably against my chest. With his free hand, he ripped the envelope open. The tearing of the paper sounded like a gunshot in the silent foyer. I stopped struggling. My entire body went completely, terrifyingly numb. It was over. The empire I had built, the reputation I had murdered for, the solitary, powerful life I had constructed, it was all disintegrating in front of my eyes. Silas unfolded the thick medical paper. I watched his eyes scan the text. I watched the exact moment his brilliant, ruthless mind processed the medical terminology, the hormone levels, and the final, undeniable diagnosis highlighted at the bottom of the page. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I had ever experienced. It stretched for what felt like hours. Silas didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared at the paper, his breathing completely stopping. Slowly, agonizingly, Silas lowered the paper. He released my wrists, allowing his arms to fall to his sides. When he finally looked up and met my eyes, the expression on his face made my blood freeze solid. The Enigma CEO, the man known for his icy calculation and emotionless corporate slaughter, was completely gone. In his place stood a man possessed by something ancient, untamed, and violently protective. His dark eyes were dilated, almost completely black. 10 weeks, Silas whispered, his voice hoarse, raw, and shaking with an emotion I couldn't comprehend. "Silas," I started, my voice failing me. 10 weeks, he repeated, louder this time, his voice echoing off the high marble ceilings. "You are 10 weeks pregnant, and you went to a backdoor, hush-money clinic to find out." He took a step toward me, and this time, the sheer force of his Enigma aura forced me to my knees. It wasn't a physical push, it was a biological command. My pregnant alpha body, desperately craving the sire's scent and protection, betrayed my logical mind and forced me into a position of total submission. I hit the marble floor, gasping for air as Silas towered over me. "I can handle it." I forced the words out, staring up at him with defiant, tear-filled eyes. I refused to let him see me break. "It is my body, Vance. It is my mistake. I am making arrangements to step down temporarily. I will go overseas. I will handle the situation. You do not need to be involved. You will never have to see it." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I had made a catastrophic error. Silas dropped the medical papers onto the floor. He crouched down in front of me, grabbing my shoulders with a grip so tight it bruised. He hauled me up from the floor, not stopping until I was standing, pressed flush against his chest. "Handle the situation?" Silas roared, the sound deafening, filled with a primal, territorial fury that made the windows of the penthouse rattle. "You think you are going to handle my child? You think you are going to pack up my heir, hide in some foreign country, and pretend this never happened? It's my life." I screamed back, the adrenaline finally overriding my biological submission. I shoved my hands against his chest, trying to push the mountain of a man away. "We hate each other. We are rivals. This changes nothing about who we are. I am Julian Thorne, and I will not be a pathetic, pregnant incubator for you. Your life." Silas laughed, a dark, terrifying sound. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me so tightly against him that I could feel the erratic, thunderous beating of his heart against my own. He buried his face into the crook of my neck, inhaling my sweet, panicked scent deeply, letting his own dark smoke and whiskey pheromones completely drown me, suffocating my resistance. The moment his pheromones flooded my system, my body violently betrayed me again. The nauseating dizziness vanished. The sharp pain in my stomach faded into a warm, comfortable glow. My knees went weak, and despite my mind screaming to fight, my arms subconsciously wrapped around his broad shoulders to keep myself upright. I hated him for it. I hated how much my pregnant body needed him. "Your life as you knew it ended the moment this test came back positive," Silas murmured against my skin, his hot breath sending involuntary shivers down my spine. His large hand slid down my back, coming to rest firmly, possessively, over my flat stomach. A jolt of electricity shot through me at the contact. "Let go of me," I whimpered, the fight draining out of me as his scent continued to drug my senses. "Never," Silas stated, his voice absolute and unwavering. He pulled his face away from my neck, looking deeply into my eyes. The fury had been replaced by a terrifying, immovable resolve. "Listen to me very carefully, Julian. The corporate wars are over. The rivalry is dead. You are carrying my pup, my blood, my heir. I have a company to run," I protested weakly, my eyelids fluttering as the physical exhaustion of the day finally caught up with me. "I don't give a damn about your company," Silas replied coldly. "I will buy Thorne Industries tomorrow morning and dissolve the board if they cause you an ounce of stress. From this second forward, your only job, your only purpose, is keeping yourself and my child safe." He suddenly scooped me up into his arms, lifting me off the marble floor as easily as if I weighed nothing at all. I gasped, clinging to his suit jacket out of pure instinct. "Put me down, Vance. What are you doing? You are exhausted, your scent is a mess, and your body is going into shock from trying to fight me," Silas said calmly, carrying me away from the foyer and down the long hallway toward my master bedroom. "You are going to sleep. I am not sleeping with you in my house," I argued, though my head was already resting against his chest, utterly defeated by the comforting rumble of his voice and the overwhelming safety of his Enigma scent. Silas kicked open the door to my bedroom and gently, almost reverently, laid me down on the center of the massive king-sized mattress. He didn't let go of me. Instead, he climbed onto the bed beside me, pulling me back into his chest, wrapping his arms securely around my waist, his hand returning to rest protectively over my stomach. I was trapped. I was a prisoner in my own home, held captive by my greatest enemy and my own treacherous biology. "Get used to my presence, Julian," Silas whispered into the darkness of the room as he pulled the heavy comforter over us both. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and typed a quick message before tossing it onto the nightstand. "I just told my staff to pack my belongings. I am moving in tonight. I am not letting you out of my sight for the next 7 months." I closed my eyes, a single, silent tear escaping and rolling down my cheek into the pillow. The ruthless Alpha CEO was gone, replaced by a terrifying new reality. I belong to the Enigma now. End of Part 2. Part 3. The Gilded Cage. Waking up had always been a calculated process for me. At precisely 4:30 a.m. every morning, my alarm would sound, and I would rise, immediately shedding the vulnerability of sleep to don the impenetrable armor of Julian Thorne, Alpha CEO. I would review the Asian markets over a black espresso, run 10 miles on my private treadmill, and walk into Thorne Industries by 7 a.m., ready to conquer the financial world. My mornings were mine. My space was mine. But this morning, I did not wake up to the sharp beep of an alarm. I woke up to the suffocating, heavy weight of a muscular arm draped across my waist, pinning me firmly to the mattress. I gasped, my eyes flying open as the memories of last night crashed into my conscious mind like a derailed freight train. The positive pregnancy test, Dr. Eris's grim warnings, and Silas Vance, the Enigma CEO of Vance Global, sitting in my living room, claiming my home, my body, and the unborn child growing inside me. I tried to shift, to slide out from under the heavy limb holding me down, but the moment I moved, the arm tightened like a vice. A deep, chest-rattling groan vibrated against my back. Silas pulled me flush against his hard chest, burying his face into the nape of my neck. "Don't move," Silas murmured, his morning voice a gravelly, sleep-rough rumble that sent an involuntary shiver straight down my spine. He inhaled deeply against my skin, drinking in my scent. "You're restless. Go back to sleep." "Let go of me, Vance." I gritted out, my hands flying to his thick forearm to pry it off. It is 6 in the morning. The stock market waits for no one, and I have a hostile takeover to salvage after I was forced to abandon my boardroom yesterday. "The market can burn to the ground for all I care," Silas replied lazily, not budging an inch. The heavy, intoxicating scent of dark smoke and aged whiskey began to fill the sheets, a deliberate, biological tactic designed to sedate me. It was working entirely too well. My eyelids felt heavy, and the sharp edge of my alpha panic was being forcibly blunted by the Enigma's soothing aura. "You are not going anywhere, Julian. You are on strict bed rest. I am the CEO of Thorne Industries, not a fragile porcelain doll." I snapped, twisting violently in his grip until I was facing him. It was a mistake. Being this close to Silas Vance's face was dangerous enough in a fully lit boardroom, but here, tangled in my expensive silk sheets, with his dark hair tousled and his piercing eyes hooded with sleep and raw possessiveness, he was lethal. "You are a pregnant alpha whose pheromones are currently oscillating wildly between winter frost and sweet orchids," Silas stated calmly, his dark eyes trailing down to my lips before snapping back up to meet my gaze. "If you step foot into that glass tower today, every alpha on your board will smell your vulnerability. They will circle you like sharks smelling blood in the water." Harrison is already plotting a vote of no confidence. My intelligence team intercepted his emails at 3 a.m. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "You hacked my board members?" "I am protecting my investments," Silas corrected smoothly, reaching up to brush a stray lock of hair away from my forehead. I flinched away from the gentle touch, but he simply followed my movement, his hand cupping my cheek. "And you, Julian, are currently holding my most valuable asset." His thumb brushed lightly over my lower lip, and despite the burning fury in my chest, my treacherous body leaned ever so slightly into his warm palm. The biology of a pregnant alpha was a humiliating, terrifying thing. It craved the sire. It demanded submission to the Enigma to ensure the survival of the pup. Every logical, rational part of my brain screamed to fight him, but my body just wanted to curl into his chest and let him protect me. "I won't let you cage me," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and absolute terror. "I built Thorne Industries from nothing. It is my life's work. I will not surrender it to you just because of a biological accident." Silas's expression darkened instantly. The sleepy Enigma vanished, replaced by the ruthless predator that the corporate world feared. "Do not ever refer to my child as an accident again," Silas commanded, his voice dropping to a terrifying, absolute register that vibrated in the air. He shifted his weight, hovering over me, completely caging me in with his massive frame. "You are not surrendering your company, Julian. You are surviving. I am not taking your empire. I am shielding it so you can focus on carrying our heir without the stress of corporate warfare literally killing you. Now get up. My chef has prepared breakfast, and you need to eat." Silas rolled out of bed, completely unfazed by his own nakedness, grabbed a pair of my expensive silk pajama pants from the dresser, and pulled them on. He looked entirely too comfortable in my sanctuary. I sat up slowly, the room spinning slightly as a sudden wave of morning sickness threatened to rise in my throat. I swallowed hard, refusing to show weakness. I looked down at myself and realized with a flush of pure embarrassment that sometime during the night, Silas had stripped me of my restrictive suit and dressed me in one of his own massive, black cotton t-shirts. It dwarfed me, falling halfway down my thighs, and it absolutely reeked of his Enigma scent. I tore the shirt off, tossing it onto the floor, and marched into my walk-in closet to find a fresh, heavily starched suit. If I was going to be a prisoner in my own home, I was going to face my captor looking like a king, not a conquered Omega. 30 minutes later, dressed in a sharp, slate-gray three-piece suit, my hair perfectly styled to hide the pale exhaustion in my face, I walked out of my master suite and into the main living area. I stopped dead in my tracks. My penthouse had been colonized. Two massive men in immaculate dark suits with earpieces, Vance Global's elite private security, were stationed perfectly on either side of my private elevator doors. In my pristine, rarely used designer kitchen, a man in a chef's coat was busy plating a massive breakfast spread. And sitting at the head of my glass dining table, typing rapidly on a sleek laptop while sipping black coffee, was Silas. What is the meaning of this? I demanded, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. I pointed a shaking finger at the security guards. Get these men out of my house immediately. They are securing the perimeter. Silas didn't even look up from his screen. Sit down and eat, Julian. You need protein. I am not a dog you can command, Vance. I marched over to the dining table, slamming my hands down on the glass surface. This is my property. You cannot just move an entire security detail into my home without my consent. Silas finally stopped typing. He closed the laptop with a soft click, folded his hands under his chin, and looked up at me. His gaze was entirely devoid of sympathy. Your security protocols were pathetic, Julian. My team bypassed your building's encryption in less than 4 minutes last night. If I could get in that easily, so could corporate spies, or worse, someone hired by a rival alpha looking to exploit your current, delicate condition. Silas stood up, pulling out the chair next to him. Sit. I glared at him with enough venom to kill a lesser man, but I was suddenly hit by another wave of dizziness. My hands shook against the glass table. The heavy scent of the cooked eggs and bacon wafting from the kitchen was making my stomach churn violently. I had no choice but to collapse into the chair he offered before my legs gave out. I am not hungry, I gritted out, staring at the extravagant plate the chef placed in front of me. Just looking at the food made my throat tighten. Eat, Silas repeated, sitting back down. Dr. Eris sent over a comprehensive dietary plan for an alpha pregnancy. You are severely lacking in essential nutrients. Before I could formulate a sufficiently biting response, my secure corporate phone, sitting in my breast pocket, began to vibrate violently. I pulled it out. It was Clara, my chief executive assistant. It's my office, I said sharply, sliding my thumb over the screen to answer. Clara. Report. Mr. Thorne, thank God. Clara's usually professional voice was bordering on sheer panic. Sir, it's absolute chaos here. Board member Harrison has called an emergency virtual meeting. He is demanding a vote of no confidence regarding your leadership, citing your erratic behavior and abrupt departure yesterday. He claims you are medically unfit to lead Thorne Industries. The stock is already dipping in pre-market trading. Sir, if you don't log into this meeting and assert control right now, they are going to freeze your executive powers. The blood drained from my face entirely. Everything I had built, every sacrifice I had made over the last decade, was unraveling in the span of 24 hours. Send me the encrypted link immediately, I ordered, my voice hollow. I hung up the phone. I didn't even look at Silas. I practically ripped my own laptop from my leather briefcase resting on a nearby chair, threw it open onto the dining table, and clicked the link Clara had sent. The screen flickered to life, displaying a grid of 12 different video feeds. The faces of Thorne Industries' board of directors stared back at me. At the center of the grid was Harrison, looking smug and infuriatingly confident. Ah, Mr. Thorne, Harrison said, his voice dripping with condescension. How gracious of you to join us from your dining room. I trust you have recovered from whatever illness caused you to flee our crucial meeting yesterday. I straightened my spine, staring directly into the camera lens. I forced my alpha aura to the absolute maximum, ignoring the painful, twisting cramp in my stomach. I experienced a minor medical anomaly, Harrison. It has been resolved, I stated coldly. Now, what is this nonsense about a vote of no confidence? We are in the middle of a critical acquisition. You are a liability, Julian, Harrison sneered, leaning closer to his camera. "You smelled like a frightened Omega yesterday. You are hiding something. We need a strong, present, capable alpha leading this company, not a boy who runs and hides in his penthouse the moment the pressure rises." I moved to officially strip Julian Thorne of his executive voting rights pending a full, independent medical evaluation. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the virtual room. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was cornered. If I submitted to a medical evaluation, they would find out I was pregnant. If I refused, they would freeze my power. "You will do no such thing," I snarled, but a sudden, violent wave of nausea hit me so hard my vision swam. I clamped my mouth shut, swallowing down the bile, my face turning practically green. I gripped the edges of my laptop, my knuckles white, desperately trying to maintain my composure, but I was failing. I was breaking down on live camera. Then a massive, warm hand clamped firmly down on my shoulder. The heavy, dominating scent of dark smoke and whiskey flooded my senses, instantly quelling the nausea and wrapping me in an invisible, impenetrable shield of Enigma authority. Silas Vance walked directly into the frame of the camera, standing right behind my chair. He looked immaculate in his tailored suit, his sheer physical size dominating the shot. He didn't just place his hand on my shoulder. His long fingers curled possessively around my neck, an ancient, instinctual claim that every alpha on that screen would instantly recognize and fear. The 12 video feeds descended into absolute, stunned silence. Harrison's smug expression vanished, replaced by pale, wide-eyed terror. The Enigma CEO of their greatest, most ruthless rival was standing in my private penthouse, staking a physical claim over me. "Good morning, gentlemen," Silas said, his deep voice smooth, deadly, and carrying an undeniable threat. He didn't look at the screen. He kept his dark eyes fixed on me, his thumb slowly, soothingly stroking the side of my neck. "I apologize for interrupting your little mutiny, but I felt it was necessary to clarify a few things regarding Mr. Thorne's current situation." "Vance," Harrison stammered, entirely losing his alpha bravado. What are you doing there? What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, Harrison, is that Vance Global is now in a private, deeply entrenched partnership with Thorne Industries." Silas lied smoothly, though the threat behind his words was entirely real. Silas finally turned his terrifying gaze to the camera. "Julian and I have been in closed-door negotiations for weeks. The sheer exhaustion of dealing with an enigma on a daily basis is what caused his minor lapse yesterday. As of this morning, Vance Global is fully backing Thorne's current tech acquisitions with our infinite capital reserves." The board members gasped collectively. It was the financial equivalent of a nuclear bomb. "Furthermore," Silas continued, his grip tightening slightly on my neck, a warning and a comfort all at once. "If anyone in this company, board member or otherwise, attempts to file a vote of no confidence against Julian Thorne, I will personally view it as a direct attack on Vance Global's assets. I will hostile take over your shares, liquidate your portfolios, and ensure none of you ever work in this city again. Do I make myself absolutely clear?" No one breathed. No one moved. The absolute dominance of the Enigma had entirely paralyzed a board of millionaire alphas through a screen. "Crystal clear, Mr. Vance," Harrison whispered, utterly defeated. "Excellent," Silas said. "Mr. Thorne will be working remotely for the foreseeable future to finalize our partnership. He has my absolute, unwavering support. Have a productive day." Silas reached down and closed the laptop, severing the connection. The silence in the dining room was heavy. I stared at the closed silver lid of the computer, my chest heaving. He had saved my company. He had publicly humiliated my enemies. And in doing so, he had completely, undeniably chained me to him. The world now thought Thorne Industries belonged to Vance Global. I was furious. I was humiliated. But worst of all, as the intense adrenaline faded, the physical toll of the pregnancy crashed down on me. The nausea returned with a vengeance. I slapped Silas's hand away from my neck, pushed my chair back violently, and bolted for the hallway bathroom. I barely made it to the toilet before I collapsed to my knees, violently emptying the meager contents of my stomach. My entire body shook with the force of the morning sickness. It was agonizing, humiliating, and thoroughly undignified. Tears of frustration pricked my eyes as I gasped for air, leaning my forehead against the cool porcelain. Footsteps entered the bathroom. I expected a mocking comment. I expected the ruthless Enigma to gloat over my physical weakness. Instead, I felt a warm, damp towel gently wipe the sweat from my forehead. Silas knelt on the tile floor beside me. His large hand gathered my hair, pulling it away from my face, while his other hand rubbed slow, comforting circles onto my lower back. He didn't speak. He just released wave after wave of soothing, protective pheromones, wrapping me in a cocoon of safety that my pregnant body desperately craved. "I hate you," I rasped out, my voice broken and weak as I leaned back against the bathroom wall, completely spent. Silas took the damp towel and gently wiped the corner of my mouth. The cold, calculating Enigma CEO from the video call was gone. In his place was a man looking at me with such raw, terrifying devotion that it made my heart ache. "I know," Silas whispered softly, carefully lifting me into his arms to carry me back to bed. "Hatred is an obsession, Julian, and I have always been deeply obsessed with you. You carry my entire world inside you now. I will burn this city to the ground to keep you safe, whether you want me to or not." End of Part 3. Part 4. The Golden Handcuffs. 2 weeks. It had been exactly 14 agonizing, suffocating days since Silas Vance had invaded my penthouse and declared himself the absolute dictator of my life, my health, and my unborn child. To the outside world, the financial district of the city was reeling from the shockwave of the century. The press was having a field day with the unprecedented strategic partnership between Thorne Industries and Vance Global. My stock had stabilized and then skyrocketed, backed by the terrifying infinite capital of Silas's empire. Board member Harrison had practically vanished into the shadows, thoroughly terrified of Silas's threat. On paper, I was more powerful than ever. In reality, I was a prisoner wearing golden handcuffs, locked inside a multi-million-dollar glass cage. My sprawling, minimalist penthouse had been completely overhauled. Silas's elite security team occupied the perimeter 24/7. My liquor cabinet, which once held the finest aged scotches, had been ruthlessly emptied and replaced with organic prenatal juices, herbal teas, and high-protein supplements. The thermostat was permanently set to a temperature Silas deemed optimal for incubation, and Silas himself was always there. He had essentially moved Vance Global's headquarters to my dining room table. He ran his international empire with ruthless efficiency from a laptop, all while keeping me firmly within his line of sight. He monitored my meals, my water intake, and my sleep schedule with the same terrifying intensity he used to dissect corporate mergers. It was mid-morning on a Tuesday. I was sitting on the plush leather sofa in the living area, a thick blanket draped over my legs, attempting to review the final contractual clauses of the Silicon Valley tech acquisition on my tablet. My head throbbed. The first trimester was proving to be a biological nightmare. My alpha body was constantly at war with itself, trying to accept the foreign Enigma DNA growing inside me. My pheromones were a chaotic mess, and the chronic fatigue was deeply humiliating. I scrolled through the document, my eyes narrowing at a discrepancy in the legal jargon. It was a loophole. The tech firm was trying to sneak in a clause that would dilute Thorne Industries' voting shares post-merger. Those arrogant parasites. I growled under my breath, my alpha instincts flaring. My heart rate spiked, and a sharp spike of stress shot through my chest. Instantly, the faint, sweet scent of crushed orchids that had become my permanent aura began to sour, turning sharp and distressed. Across the room, Silas stopped typing. I didn't even have to look up to know he was moving. Within seconds, the tablet was smoothly but forcefully pulled from my grip. "Hey!" I snapped, my head snapping up to glare at him. "Give that back, Vance. I am in the middle of a multi-million-dollar contract review. Your heart rate just elevated, and your scent is spiking with cortisol," Silas said calmly, locking the tablet and tossing it casually onto the coffee table out of my reach. He was dressed in a crisp black dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to expose his muscular forearms. Dr. Eris was very explicit, Julian. Stress is toxic to the pup's development during the foundational weeks. You are done working for the day. It is 10:30 in the morning. I practically shouted, pushing the blanket off my legs and standing up. My legs felt a bit shaky, but my pride refused to let me stay seated. I cannot abandon a merger because of a minor fluctuation in my heart rate. I am the CEO. You are a pregnant carrier currently hovering on the edge of a biological crisis, Silas countered, his voice remaining infuriatingly steady. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His sheer physical presence and the heavy, intoxicating wave of dark smoke and whiskey pheromones he released were enough to make the air heavy. The tech firm's legal team is attempting a backdoor dilution of your shares. Section 4, Paragraph B. I blinked, momentarily thrown off guard. You read the contract? When? While you were sleeping last night, Silas said, stepping closer to me. I already had my legal team draft a countercontract. If they don't sign it by noon, Vance Global will personally short their stock into oblivion. The problem is handled, Julian. Now sit back down. My fists clenched at my sides. Stop doing that. Stop stepping into my company, Silas. I didn't ask for your help. I didn't ask for any of this. I am perfectly capable of crushing them myself. Not right now, you aren't, Silas said, his eyes darkening. He took the final step, closing the distance between us. I had to tilt my head up to meet his gaze. Your pride is going to get you hurt. You are so desperate to maintain this facade of the untouchable alpha that you are ignoring the reality of what your body is going through. Look at you. He reached out, his large hands gently but firmly gripping my waist. You're trembling, Julian. I hated it, but he was right. The sudden burst of adrenaline had completely depleted my energy reserves. My knees felt weak, and a familiar, nauseating wave of dizziness washed over me. I swayed slightly. Silas's grip tightened instantly, supporting my weight. Before I could protest, he swept me up into his arms, carrying me effortlessly back to the sofa. He sat down, arranging me sideways across his lap, my back resting against his broad chest. Let me go, I muttered, but there was no real fight left in my voice. I was so tired. Never, Silas murmured, wrapping his arms securely around me. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply. As his enigma pheromones enveloped me completely, the panic, the stress, and the nausea began to melt away, replaced by a heavy, drug-like lethargy. It was a biological failsafe. My body recognized him as the sire, the ultimate protector, and forcefully shut down my alpha defenses to ensure the safety of the pregnancy. I hated how much I craved his scent. I hated how safe I felt in the arms of the man who had been my bitterest rival for 5 years. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Silas moved his large hand from my waist and let it rest flat against my lower abdomen. I stiffened. We had been living together for 2 weeks, but we hadn't spoken about the actual child. We had treated the pregnancy like a medical condition, a corporate crisis to be managed. But as his warm palm rested precisely over where our pup was growing, the reality of the situation became terrifyingly intimate. I expected him to say something mocking, or perhaps something possessively arrogant. But when he spoke, his voice was barely more than a rough whisper, vibrating against my back. Are you in pain? Silas asked, his thumb drawing a slow, gentle circle over my shirt. Just tired, I admitted quietly, the fight completely drained out of me. It feels like my body isn't my own anymore. It's adapting, Silas said softly. His hand remained perfectly still on my stomach, a grounding, heavy heat. Enigma DNA is aggressively dominant. It demands a lot from the carrier. But you are strong, Julian. The strongest alpha I have ever known. That is why you are the only one who could ever carry my heir. The raw honesty in his voice made my throat tighten. The lines between our past hatred and this bizarre, enforced intimacy were blurring so rapidly I couldn't tell where the rivalry ended and the bond began. I closed my eyes, letting the steady rhythm of his heartbeat lull me into a state of half-sleep. The quiet moment was abruptly shattered by the sharp buzzing of the penthouse intercom. Silas sighed, a sound of deep annoyance, but he didn't release his hold on me. Yes, he barked toward the room's smart speaker. Mr. Vance, sir. The voice of one of Silas's security guards echoed through the room. A Ms. Clara Evans is in the lobby. She claims to be Mr. Thorne's executive assistant and states she has highly sensitive, physical documents requiring his immediate signature. She is refusing to hand them over to us. My eyes snapped open. Clara. She was brilliant, fiercely loyal, and absolutely terrified of Silas Vance. Send her up, I said immediately, struggling to sit up. Silas's arms tightened around me. She can leave the documents with security. You are resting. Silas, if Clara is demanding a physical signature, it means it's regarding the offshore accounts. I hissed, pushing against his chest. I cannot authorize that digitally. I have to see her. If you don't let her up, she will call the authorities and claim you are holding me hostage. Which technically you are. Silas narrowed his eyes, clearly weighing the risks. Finally, he clicked the intercom. Escort her up to the private elevator. Do not let her bring any recording devices. He finally released me, allowing me to stand. I hurriedly smoothed down my clothes, trying to project an air of command. I grabbed my suit jacket from a nearby chair and slipped it on, desperately hoping the tailored wool would hide any subtle changes in my posture or scent. A minute later, the private elevator doors slid open. Clara stepped out, clutching a leather briefcase to her chest like a shield. She looked around the heavily guarded, transformed penthouse with wide, terrified eyes. When her gaze landed on Silas, who was standing in the center of the room looking like a dark, looming monolith, she visibly flinched. "And Mr. Vance," Clara stammered, bowing her head slightly in an involuntary display of submission to his enigma aura. "Clara," I said sharply, drawing her attention. I stepped forward, putting myself between her and Silas. "What is the emergency?" Clara looked at me, and I saw the confusion wash over her face. I knew what she was experiencing. To her eyes, I looked like Julian Thorne, but her senses were telling her a completely different story. The sharp, icy winter frost scent of her terrifying alpha boss was gone, masked entirely by the heavy, overwhelming scent of Silas's dark smoke, mixed with the faint, underlying sweetness of my own altered biology. To Clara, it smelled like Silas Vance had completely claimed and marked me as his own. "Mr. Thorne," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly as she opened her briefcase. "The European banking regulators require physical ink on the transfer protocols before the close of business in London. I had to bring them directly to you." She pulled out a thick stack of papers and handed them to me, along with a heavy gold fountain pen. Her hands were trembling. I took the documents and moved to the dining table to sign them. Clara followed cautiously, casting terrified glances back at Silas, who was watching our every move with hawkish intensity. "Sir," Clara whispered urgently as I leaned over the table, keeping her voice so low she hoped Silas wouldn't hear. "Sir, are you safe? If you are being coerced into this partnership, if he is threatening you, I can contact the federal authorities. We have contingency plans for hostile takeovers." Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't sound like a complete lie, the heavy footsteps of Silas approached from behind. "Julian is perfectly safe, Ms. Evans." Silas's deep voice sent a visible shudder down Clara's spine. Silas stepped up right behind me. To Clara's absolute horror, he didn't just stand there. He reached out, his large hand wrapping possessively around my waist, pulling my back flush against his chest. He leaned down, resting his chin casually on my shoulder, looking at the documents I was signing. It was a blatant, unapologetic display of total dominance and intimate ownership. My face burned with a mixture of rage and profound embarrassment. I tried to subtly elbow him in the ribs, but he was like a brick wall. His grip on my waist only tightened, his thumb brushing against my stomach in a silent, possessive warning. As I explained to the board, Silas continued smoothly, his breath ghosting over my ear, making me shiver uncontrollably. "Julian and I are deeply partnered. He is currently recovering from severe exhaustion due to our intensive negotiations. I am simply ensuring he doesn't overwork himself." Clara stared at us, her jaw practically unhinged. She looked at Silas's hand resting intimately on my waist, then up to my flushed face. She saw me, the most ruthless alpha she knew, completely submitting to the physical touch of an enigma without a fight. The reality she was constructing in her head was probably wilder than the truth. I understand, Mr. Vance," Clara whispered, her eyes darting to the floor. "I apologize for overstepping. You were protecting your boss." "It's commendable," Silas said, finally lifting his head but keeping his hand firmly anchored on my body. "Take the signed documents, Ms. Evans, and please ensure my security team at the lobby gets a list of any future emergency deliveries. Julian's rest is not to be interrupted unnecessarily again." I quickly signed the last page, practically shoving the papers back into Clara's hands. "Thank you, Clara. That will be all. Please handle the London office." "Yes, Mr. Thorne. Right away." Clara grabbed the papers, practically running backward toward the elevator. The doors closed behind her, sealing us back in our private world. The moment the elevator descended, I ripped myself out of Silas's grip, spinning around to face him. "What the hell was that?" I exploded, my chest heaving. "You practically humiliated me in front of my chief assistant. You made it look like we were. Like you belonged to me?" Silas finished for me, entirely unbothered by my rage. "You do, Julian. The sooner you stop fighting that reality, the easier this pregnancy will be for you. I don't belong to anyone," I yelled, though the words lacked their usual conviction. Silas walked toward me, slowly backing me up against the edge of the dining table. He placed his hands on the glass on either side of my hips, trapping me. He leaned in, his dark eyes burning with that terrifying, obsessive fire. "You are carrying my child," Silas whispered, his voice dark and absolute. "Your body is changing to accommodate my blood. Your scent is saturated with mine." Clara saw exactly what she needed to see to know that Julian Thorne is untouchable by anyone else in this world. "You are mine to protect, mine to care for, and I don't care who knows it." He leaned down and pressed his lips firmly against the crook of my neck, right over my scent gland, inhaling deeply. A helpless, humiliating whine escaped my throat as my biology instantly submitted to the contact, my knees trembling. I gripped the lapels of his jacket, not to push him away, but to keep myself from falling. The terrifying truth was undeniable. The golden handcuffs were tight, and deep down, I was beginning to realize I didn't want the key. End of Part 4. Part 5, The First Echo. The mirror in my master bathroom had become my greatest enemy. It had been 4 weeks since Silas Vance had turned my life into a high-security lockdown. I was now 14 weeks along, pushing into my second trimester. For an alpha, pregnancy was a biological paradox, a brutal tug-of-war between my natural dominance and the overwhelming, instinctual need to submit to the Enigma sire. But the most terrifying battlefield wasn't my mind or my boardroom anymore. It was my own physical reflection. I stood barefoot on the heated marble floor, staring at my profile in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. I was wearing a pair of dark, tailored slacks, the same brand I had worn for years, but as I tried to fasten the top button, my fingers froze. It wouldn't close. There was a distinct, undeniable curve resting just above my hips. It was small, easily hidden beneath a loose sweater or a properly cut blazer, but to my meticulously critical eye, it was massive. It was a physical manifestation of my surrender. The flat, hard planes of my alpha physique were softening, making room for the Enigma's air. I let out a shaky breath, dropping my hands to my sides. I felt a sudden, humiliating sting of tears prick my eyes. It was the hormones, I told myself furiously. The constant, volatile cocktail of estrogen and Enigma-induced relaxin was making me emotionally unstable. I was Julian Thorne. I didn't cry over waistlines. Stop looking at it like it's a flaw. The deep, gravelly voice echoed off the bathroom walls. I jumped, my heart hammering against my ribs. Silas was leaning against the marble doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, minus the tie, looking every bit the lethal apex predator he was. His dark eyes were fixed entirely on my exposed stomach, and the air in the room instantly grew heavy with the scent of dark smoke and aged whiskey. "Do you ever knock?" I snapped, quickly turning around and reaching for the loose white dress shirt I had draped over the counter. Before I could grab the fabric, Silas crossed the room in 2 long strides. His large hand clamped over my wrist, completely halting my retreat. "Don't hide from me," Silas commanded softly. He pulled the shirt out of my grasp and tossed it aside. "Vance, let go," I muttered, looking away, my face burning with a mixture of anger and deep vulnerability. None of my clothes fit properly. I look ridiculous. I look like a textbook Omega. "You look like you are carrying my child," Silas corrected, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with that terrifying, possessive purr. He released my wrist, only to slide both of his large, warm hands around my waist from behind. He pulled my back flush against his solid chest, his thumbs resting exactly over the small swell of my stomach. The moment his skin made contact, my traitorous biology sighed in relief. The frantic, anxious buzzing in my head quieted, drowned out by the sheer, overwhelming safety of his pheromones. My eyelids fluttered shut for a fraction of a second before I forced them open, glaring at our reflection in the mirror. "You are radiant, Julian," Silas whispered, his lips brushing against the shell of my ear. "Your scent is richer. Your skin is warmer. You have never looked more beautiful to me than you do right now. I am an alpha CEO, Silas, not a fragile piece of art for you to admire," I retorted, though the bite in my voice was severely lacking. I couldn't stop myself from leaning my weight back against him. It was maddening. "You can be both," Silas replied easily, his hands gently mapping the new curve of my body. "Dr. Eris is expecting us in 20 minutes. Get dressed. Wear something comfortable." My eyes snapped wide open in the mirror. "Expecting us? What are you talking about? It's midnight." "Exactly," Silas said, stepping back and breaking the physical contact. The sudden absence of his heat made me shiver. The financial district is asleep. The paparazzi are chasing a scandal across town. It is the only safe window for us to leave the penthouse without a telephoto lens capturing your changing profile. We have an ultrasound appointment. A cold spike of adrenaline shot through my veins. An ultrasound. Until now, the pregnancy had felt like a conceptual threat, a medical diagnosis, a shift in hormones, a change in my wardrobe. But an ultrasound meant looking at it, acknowledging it as a physical, living entity. "I don't need an ultrasound," I said quickly, backing away toward the closet. "I feel perfectly fine." The nausea has subsided. There's no medical necessity. Julian, Silas's voice hardened, the Enigma authority crashing down over me like a tidal wave, instantly silencing my protests. We are going. I am not negotiating the health of my pup. I have a secure convoy waiting in the underground garage. Put on the sweater, or I will dress you myself. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the back of a heavily armored, blacked-out SUV. Silas sat beside me, his thigh pressed firmly against mine. A small army of Vance Global Security vehicles flanked us on all sides as we tore through the empty, rain-slicked streets of the city. I felt like a highly classified, stolen artifact being transported under the cover of darkness. The silence in the car was suffocating. I stared out the tinted window at the blurred city lights, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. Silas reached over, his large hand completely enveloping both of mine. He uncurled my tense fingers, interlacing them with his own. He didn't say a word, just released a slow, steady pulse of calming pheromones into the confined space of the vehicle. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. When we arrived at Dr. Eris's elite, discreet clinic, the building was completely locked down. Silas's men had already secured the perimeter, standing like dark statues at every entrance. Dr. Eris himself was waiting in the private underground bay, looking pale and thoroughly intimidated by the sheer show of force. Mr. Vance. Mr. Thorne, Dr. Eris greeted nervously, adjusting his glasses as we stepped out of the SUV. Everything is prepared in Examination Room 1. Absolute privacy as requested. Silas didn't offer a greeting. He simply kept his hand firmly on the small of my back, guiding me forward with an inescapable protective pressure. Walking into the examination room felt like walking to the gallows. The room was dimly lit, the large ultrasound machine humming quietly in the corner. The medical paper on the examination table crinkled loudly in the silence as Dr. Eris motioned for me to sit. If you would just lie back, Julian, and lift your sweater to expose your lower abdomen, Dr. Eris instructed, his voice tight. He kept shooting nervous glances at Silas, who had taken up a position right next to the head of the bed, crossing his arms and looking like a dark sentinel. I hesitated. Stripping off my armor in front of a rival CEO was one thing, but this clinical exposure felt incredibly violating. My alpha pride screamed in protest. I looked up at Silas, a silent, desperate plea in my eyes to stop this. Silas's expression softened just a fraction. He reached down, brushing his knuckles gently against my cheek. It's all right, Julian. I am right here. No one is going to hurt you. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I leaned back against the elevated medical pillow and slowly pulled the hem of the thick cashmere sweater up to my chest. The cool air of the clinic hit my bare skin, making me shiver. This gel will be a bit cold, Dr. Eris warned softly. He squeezed a clear, icy substance onto my lower stomach. I flinched, my abdominal muscles involuntarily tightening. Immediately, Silas's hand found mine, his grip solid and anchoring. Dr. Eris picked up the transducer wand and pressed it against my skin, moving it in slow, deliberate circles. The large monitor next to the bed remained dark for a terrifying few seconds, filled only with static and shadows. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought it might shatter my ribs. What if there was nothing there? What if my alpha body had finally rejected the Enigma DNA? A twisted, confusing mixture of hope and pure dread swirled in my gut. Then the monitor flickered. The gray and black static shifted, parting like clouds to reveal a distinct, curved shape resting perfectly within the dark cavern of my biology. There we are, Dr. Eris said, his professional composure returning as he manipulated the machine. 14 weeks and 2 days. The amniotic sac is perfectly intact. The Enigma sire pheromones have done an excellent job stabilizing the alpha carrier's uterine environment. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the screen. It wasn't a concept anymore. It was a perfectly formed, tiny silhouette. I could see the curve of a spine, the faint, ghostly outline of a small head. Tiny, developing limbs curled safely inwards. It was a life that belonged to me and the man holding my hand in a vice grip. Is that? Silas's voice broke. It was a sound I had never heard from the terrifying CEO. It was completely stripped of power, laid entirely bare. I looked up at him. Silas Vance, the man who destroyed corporations without blinking, was staring at the black and white screen with absolute, profound awe. His dark eyes were wide, completely dilated, tracking every pixel of the image. The heavy, intimidating Enigma aura he constantly projected melted away entirely, leaving behind a scent that was overwhelmingly warm, protective, and deeply, violently emotional. Yes, Mr. Vance, Dr. Eris smiled gently. That is your pup. And Julian, the development is progressing flawlessly. But the most important indicator is the cardiac activity. Let me turn on the audio. Dr. Eris clicked a button on the console. The silence of the room was instantly shattered by a sound that altered the fundamental fabric of my universe. Asterisk thump thump. Thump thump. Thump thump. Asterisk. It was fast, like the rapid, frantic beating of a war drum. It was strong, echoing through the small speakers and reverberating directly into my chest. It was the sound of an S-tier bloodline, fighting for life, declaring its existence to the world. A sharp, agonizing sob tore out of my throat before I could stop it. The impenetrable fortress of Julian Thorne completely collapsed. The denial, the corporate rage, the bitter rivalry, it all turned to dust in the face of that rapid, rhythmic thumping. My free hand flew to cover my mouth as tears spilled hot and fast down my cheeks. I couldn't stop them. I was crying openly, stripped of every defense I possessed. Julian, Silas gasped, dropping to his knees right beside the examination table. He didn't care about his expensive suit. He didn't care that the doctor was watching. He pressed his face against my shoulder, his broad shoulders shaking slightly. He wrapped both of his arms around my upper body, pulling me as close as the medical table would allow. Asterisk thump thump. Thump thump. Asterisk. Listen to it, Silas whispered fiercely against my skin, his voice thick with unshed tears. He lifted his head, his dark eyes locking onto mine, burning with a devotion so intense it was blinding. He brought his hand up, gently wiping the tears from my face with his thumb. Listen to how strong it is, Julian. That is us. That is our legacy. I looked down at the enigma kneeling before me. I looked at the man I had hated for years, the man who had hijacked my life, the man who was currently looking at me as if I hung the stars in the sky. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't want to fight him. I moved my trembling hand away from my mouth and reached out, tangling my fingers into Silas's dark hair. The enigma immediately leaned into the touch, a low, rumbling purr vibrating in his chest that perfectly harmonized with the rapid heartbeat echoing from the monitor. It's so fast. I choked out a watery, disbelieving laugh escaping my lips. I looked back at the screen, watching the tiny flicker of the heart valve working. It sounds like a freight train. It's an enigma-sired pup, Dr. Eris chuckled warmly, turning the volume down just a fraction. They are notoriously robust. You are carrying a very powerful child, Julian. Silas stood up slowly, never breaking eye contact with me. He leaned over the bed, bracing his hands on either side of my head, and pressed a deep, lingering kiss to my forehead. You did this, Silas murmured, his breath hot against my skin. You are keeping our child safe. I swear to you, Julian, on my life, my company, and my blood, I will give you the world. No one will ever touch you. No one will ever threaten what we have. The golden handcuffs were still there. I was still trapped in a life I hadn't planned, stripped of the independence I had worshipped. But as the sound of my pup's heartbeat filled the quiet clinic room, and the heavy, intoxicating scent of my protective enigma wrapped around me, the cage didn't feel so cold anymore. It felt like home. End of Part 5. Part 6. The Apex Predator. By the time I reached my 6th month of pregnancy, the reality of my situation could no longer be hidden behind tailored vests or clever posture. My alpha body had fully, undeniably surrendered to the enigma DNA growing inside of me. The sharp, intimidating angles of my physique had softened, replaced by a pronounced, heavy curve that carried the undeniable weight of Silas Vance's air. My life had fallen into a strange, intoxicating rhythm. The penthouse was no longer a gilded cage. It had become a sanctuary. My fierce, independent alpha pride had slowly melted away under the relentless, overwhelming devotion of my former rival. Silas treated me not as a prisoner, but as a deity. He anticipated my every need, managed Thorne Industries with ruthless efficiency to keep the stress off my shoulders, and spent his nights speaking in low, gravelly whispers to my swollen stomach. I was completely, irreversibly saturated in his scent of dark smoke and aged whiskey. I had stopped fighting the bond. In truth, I had begun to crave it. But the outside world was still vicious, and the wolves of the financial district were growing restless. I am going, Silas, I stated firmly, standing in front of the master bathroom mirror as I adjusted the cuffs of my bespoke suit. It was a masterpiece of Italian tailoring, specifically commissioned by Silas. The midnight blue fabric was expertly draped and structured to accommodate my 6-month bump, making it look like a stylistic choice rather than a medical condition. I looked elegant, powerful, and dangerously untouchable. Silas was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his broad chest. The deep scowl on his face could have frozen a lesser man in his tracks. "It is the annual Global Economic Summit, Julian," Silas growled, his enigma aura flaring with heavy territorial displeasure. "It is a cesspool of desperate, climbing alphas reeking of cheap cologne and aggression. The air quality alone is enough to distress the pup. I have already sent Clara to represent Thorn Industries. You do not need to be there." "I have missed 3 consecutive quarterly galas," I countered, turning to face him. I walked slowly toward him, my hand resting instinctively over the heavy curve of my stomach. The rumors are starting to fester. They think Vance Global has swallowed Thorn Industries whole, and that I am locked away in an asylum. I need to show my face. I need to remind them that Julian Thorn is still breathing. "Let them think whatever they want," Silas replied coldly, his jaw ticking. He reached out as I approached, his large hands immediately settling on my hips, pulling me into the warmth of his body. "I don't care about their rumors. I care about your blood pressure. I care about the fact that you haven't slept properly in 3 days because the pup is kicking your ribs into dust." I sighed softly, resting my hands on his broad chest, feeling the steady, calming thrum of his heartbeat. "I am going out of my mind staring at these penthouse walls, Silas. Please. 2 hours. We make an appearance, we shake a few hands, and the moment I feel tired, we leave." Silas stared down at me, his dark eyes searching my face for any sign of weakness. He let out a heavy, defeated breath, his enigma instincts warring with his desire to give me whatever I wanted. 2 hours, Silas finally conceded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, possessive rumble. "But you do not leave my side. You do not drink anything that I have not personally inspected. And my security team will clear a 10-foot radius around you at all times. If any alpha even looks at you with the wrong intent, I will tear their throat out on the ballroom floor." "Deal." I smiled faintly, leaning up to press a brief, placating kiss to his jaw. The ballroom of the Grand Continental Hotel was a dazzling, suffocating sea of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over hundreds of the world's elite. The moment the grand double doors opened and Silas and I stepped inside, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. We were a terrifying spectacle. The infamous, ruthless enigma, Silas Vance, clad in pitch black, projecting an aura of absolute, suffocating dominance. And me, Julian Thorn, standing right by his side, exuding a quiet, untouchable royalty. Silas's hand rested firmly on the small of my back, a public, undeniable brand of ownership. He was purposely flooding the space around us with his heavy pheromones, perfectly masking the sweet, vulnerable scent of my pregnancy, ensuring no one could smell the crushed orchids and honey hiding beneath his dark smoke. For the first hour, everything went exactly as planned. Board members who had once plotted my downfall now bowed their heads in deep submission as Silas glared at them. I engaged in brief, sharp corporate banter, proving my mind was as lethal as ever, while Silas stood like a dark sentinel at my shoulder. "You look exhausted," Silas murmured into my ear after dispatching a group of European investors. His thumb rubbed soothing circles against my lower spine. "Your heart rate is elevating. We are leaving. Just give me 10 minutes, I whispered back, leaning slightly into his side, grateful for his solid support. My lower back was aching fiercely. "I need some fresh air. The perfume in here is making me nauseous." Silas nodded grimly. He guided me toward the secluded, expansive marble balcony overlooking the city skyline. It was empty, cordoned off by Vance Global Security. The cool night air hit my flushed face, providing instant relief. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath, resting both hands on my stomach as the pup gave a sharp, restless kick. "I have to sign the finalized Swiss accounts transfer," Silas said softly, stepping in front of me. "My CFO is waiting just inside the glass doors. It will take exactly 2 minutes. I am leaving 4 guards at the balcony entrance. Will you be all right?" "I am pregnant, Silas, not helpless." I opened my eyes, giving him a tired but genuine smile. "Go. Sign the papers. I will be right here, enjoying the oxygen." Silas hesitated, his enigma instincts screaming at him not to leave his pregnant mate, even for 120 seconds. He leaned down, pressing a hard, desperate kiss to my lips, his hand gripping the back of my neck. 2 minutes, he promised, pulling away and walking briskly back inside. I turned my back to the ballroom, leaning my forearms against the cool marble balustrade, looking out over the glittering city. It was the first time I had been alone, truly out of Silas's immediate physical reach in months. Well, well, how the mighty Ice King has fallen. The voice was a slimy, venomous hiss that instantly made my blood run cold. I spun around. Stepping out from the shadows of the heavy velvet curtains, bypassing the guards through a private service door, was Marcus Sterling. Sterling was an alpha CEO of a rival logistics firm, a man I had personally bankrupted 3 years ago. He was bitter, desperate, and notoriously unstable. His eyes were bloodshot, his suit rumpled, and his scent was a rancid, aggressive wave of sour pine and rotting wood. "Sterling," I said coldly, forcing my spine to straighten, projecting every ounce of alpha command I had left in my exhausted body. "You are trespassing in a secured VIP area. Leave immediately before I have security throw you off this balcony." Sterling didn't retreat. Instead, he took a step forward, his manic eyes dropping directly to my midsection. Despite the expert tailoring, from this angle, the heavy swell of my pregnancy was visible. Sterling took a deep, aggressive breath through his nose, his eyes widening in sick, twisted realization. "Oh my God," Sterling breathed out, a manic, delighted laugh escaping his lips. "It's true. The whispers in the dark web were actually true. Julian Thorne, the great untouchable alpha, is an incubator." Panic, sharp and primal, pierced through my chest. Without Silas's pheromones blanketing me, my own biology reacted to the threat. My scent immediately spiked, the sweet, distressed aroma of orchids flooding the balcony, completely betraying my vulnerability. "Stay away from me," I snarled, taking a step back until my spine hit the marble railing. My hands instinctively moved to shield my stomach, my heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. "You ruined my life, Thorne," Sterling shouted, his face contorting with rage. He stepped closer, deliberately releasing a concentrated, aggressive burst of hostile alpha pheromones. It was a biological attack meant to force submission. The impact on my pregnant body was devastating. The hostile scent crashed into my system like a physical blow. My knees buckled under the sheer force of the biological distress. A sharp, agonizing cramp tore through my lower abdomen, making me gasp in pain as I slumped against the railing, clutching my stomach. "Look at you," Sterling sneered, standing over me, reaching out a hand. "A pathetic, submissive mess. If I leak this to the press, your empire will crumble by dawn. Let's see how much Vance is willing to pay to keep his little Omega's secret." Sterling's hand never reached me. The heavy glass doors of the balcony exploded outward, shattering into a million glittering pieces that rained down on the marble floor. The temperature on the balcony plummeted to absolute zero. The air became so thick, so heavy with the suffocating scent of dark smoke and pure, unfiltered Enigma rage, that it became impossible to breathe. Silas Vance didn't walk out onto the balcony. He descended upon it like a god of war. He moved with a speed that shouldn't have been physically possible for a man of his size. Before Sterling could even turn his head, Silas's massive hand shot out, wrapping entirely around the rival Alpha's throat. Silas lifted Sterling clean off his feet, his grip crushing the man's windpipe. "You breathed his air." Silas's voice was not human. It was a demonic, vibrating roar that shook the very foundations of the building. His eyes were entirely black, devoid of anything resembling mercy. Sterling thrashed violently, his hands clawing uselessly at Silas's iron grip, his face turning a deep, horrifying shade of purple as his oxygen was completely cut off. "Silas!" I choked out, a fresh wave of agonizing pain tearing through my stomach. I was hyperventilating, the stress of the hostile pheromones sending my body into a dangerous, premature panic. "Silas, stop. The pup." The word broke the Enigma's murderous trance. Silas threw Sterling aside like a broken doll. The rival Alpha hit the marble wall with a sickening crunch and slid to the floor, unconscious and gasping for air. In a fraction of a second, Silas was on his knees beside me. The suffocating rage in his scent vanished, instantly replaced by a tidal wave of warm, soothing, desperate protection. He pulled me into his chest, wrapping his arms around my trembling body, burying his face into my neck, breathing me in. "I've got you. You're safe." "My Julian, my heart, you're safe," Silas chanted frantically, his large hands roaming over my body, checking for injuries, before resting firmly over my cramped stomach. "It hurts, Silas," I sobbed, gripping the lapels of his ruined suit. The physical pain in my abdomen was sharp, a terrifying tightening that refused to let go. "The pheromones," he distressed the pup. "It hurts so much." Silas's face went deadly pale. He looked at my stomach, then back up to my tear-streaked face. "Security," Silas roared, a sound that brought 10 armed guards rushing onto the balcony instantly. He didn't even look at them. He kept his eyes locked on me. Lock down the hotel. Have Dr. Eris meet us at the private hospital wing immediately. Prepare the medical transport. Silas scooped me up into his arms, holding me tightly against his chest as if I were made of fragile glass. Hold on to me, Julian, Silas whispered, his voice trembling with a terror I had never heard from him before. He carried me swiftly through the chaotic ballroom, ignoring the gasps and the flashes of cameras. Please, just hold on. I buried my face in his neck, inhaling his scent like it was my only lifeline as another agonizing cramp ripped through my body. The unexpected threat had been neutralized, but the real nightmare was only just beginning. End of Part 6. Part 7, The Fragile Line. The back of the armored medical transport was a blur of flashing sirens and suffocating panic. I was lying across the leather seats, my head resting in Silas's lap, my fingers digging so deeply into his thighs I knew I was leaving bruises. Every time the heavy vehicle hit a bump in the road, another agonizing, seizing cramp ripped through my lower abdomen. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut, a violent, unnatural tightening that stole the oxygen directly from my lungs. Breathe, Julian. Keep your eyes on me, Silas pleaded, his voice completely stripped of its usual commanding Enigma timbre. He was terrified. The man who had conquered global markets without breaking a sweat was trembling violently beneath me. Silas, it hurts, I gasped out, my vision swimming with black spots. The hostile, rotting pine scent of Sterling's attack was still clinging to the back of my throat, poisoning my senses and sending my alpha biology into a catastrophic tailspin. My body was violently trying to expel the perceived threat, completely ignoring the fact that it was harming our child in the process. I know, my heart, I know, Silas chanted, his large hands resting firmly on either side of my swollen stomach. He was practically bathing the small space in his heavy, dark smoke and whiskey pheromones, desperately trying to override my panic. Dr. Eris is waiting. We are 2 minutes away. You are not going to lose this pup. I will not allow it. Do you hear me? I couldn't answer. Another contraction hit me, so sharp and unforgiving that an involuntary, agonizing scream tore from my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears streaming hot and fast down my pale cheeks. Faster! Silas roared at the driver, slamming his fist against the bulletproof partition. The sheer, devastating force of his Enigma roar rattled the medical equipment bolted to the walls of the transport. When the doors finally swung open, the chaos of the private hospital bay swallowed us whole. I was lifted onto a gurney. Bright, blinding fluorescent lights flashed rapidly overhead as I was rushed down the sterile white corridors. A team of elite nurses, led by a pale but focused Dr. Eris, swarmed around me, barking medical codes and connecting me to monitors. Mr. Vance, you must step back. A brave nurse attempted to intercept Silas as we burst into the trauma suite. If you try to separate me from him, I will burn this hospital to the ground, Silas snarled, his eyes flashing a dangerous primal black. He didn't step back. He followed the gurney right up to the surgical table, taking my hand in an iron grip and pressing his lips to my knuckles. Let him stay, Dr. Eris ordered immediately, snapping on sterile gloves. We need the Enigma Sire's pheromones to stabilize the carrier's nervous system. Julian, I am administering a high-dose synthetic binder to stop the premature contractions. You are going to feel a severe cold rush in your veins. I barely registered the needle piercing my arm. All I could focus on was the agonizing, twisting pain in my stomach and the terrifying silence of the fetal monitor. The heartbeat, Eris, Silas demanded, his voice shaking. Find the heartbeat. Dr. Eris squeezed the cold ultrasound gel onto my strained abdomen. His hands moved quickly, pressing the transducer wand firmly against my skin. The large monitor beside the bed illuminated, but the room was deadly silent. There was no rhythmic thumping. There was only the erratic, frantic beeping of my own elevated heart rate. Please, I whispered, staring blindly at the ceiling, my chest heaving. Please no. Not my baby. Please. For 10 agonizing, world-ending seconds, there was nothing. And then, faintly through the static, it emerged. Asterisk thump thump. Thump thump. Thump thump. Asterisk. It was slower than before, weaker, struggling against the hostile biological trauma I had endured, but it was there. It was fighting. A collective, massive sigh of relief swept through the trauma room. I felt all the remaining strength drain out of my body, leaving me completely limp against the medical bed. The pup is holding on, Dr. Eris breathed out, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He adjusted the 4 drip, watching my vitals on the monitor. The synthetic binders are neutralizing Sterling's hostile pheromones. The contractions are slowing down. Julian, you are incredibly lucky. Another 5 minutes of that exposure, and the placental separation would have been irreversible. I turned my head weakly towards Silas. The invincible Enigma CEO was on his knees beside the hospital bed. He had pressed his forehead against the mattress, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, devastating tremors. He was still gripping my hand, as if it were the only thing tethering him to the earth. Silas, I rasped my throat raw. He lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face a portrait of absolute agony and guilt. I failed you, Silas whispered, his voice cracking. He reached out with a trembling hand, lightly tracing the curve of my cheek. I swore to protect you, and I left you alone on that balcony. I let him hurt you. I almost lost my entire world because of my own arrogance. No, I forced the word out, squeezing his hand as hard as my exhausted muscles would allow. The last of my fierce, independent alpha pride dissolved entirely in that sterile hospital room. The walls I had built to protect my heart crumbled into dust. I didn't care about Thorne Industries. I didn't care about the board of directors, or the press, or my reputation. All I cared about was the man kneeling in front of me, and the tiny heartbeat echoing from the monitor. Silas, look at me, I commanded softly, the Enigma instinctively locking eyes with me. You didn't fail me. You saved us. You are the only reason we are still here. I reached down, my trembling fingers tangling into his dark hair, pulling him closer until he rested his head against my chest, right above my heart. I need you, I confessed into the quiet room, the words leaving my lips for the very first time. It wasn't just my biology speaking, it was my soul. I cannot do this without you, Silas. I don't want to do this without you. We are going to be okay. Silas let out a broken, shuddering breath, his arms wrapping carefully around my waist as he buried his face into my hospital gown. The Enigma wept, the sound completely muffled by my embrace, pouring all of his terror, his love, and his overwhelming devotion into the bond between us. The aftermath of the attack fundamentally shifted the dynamic of our lives. Dr. Eris's orders were absolute, strict, unwavering bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy. I was not allowed to leave the penthouse. I was barely allowed to walk from the bed to the sofa without Silas hovering over me like a massive, fiercely protective shadow. Weeks turned into months. The 8th month of the pregnancy hit me like a freight train. My alpha body, never designed to carry such a heavy burden, was pushed to its absolute limits. I was massive. The sheer size of the Enigma pup I was carrying made even the simplest tasks, like sitting up or taking a deep breath, an exhausting physical trial. My back ached constantly, my center of gravity was completely ruined, and the sleep deprivation was agonizing. But despite the physical misery, the penthouse had never felt more peaceful. Silas had effectively withdrawn from the public eye entirely. The mighty Vance Global was being run from the edge of my king-sized bed. He refused to leave the apartment. If his executives needed him, they had to come to the penthouse, and they were subjected to terrifying, multi-layered security screenings and chemical decontamination showers before they were even allowed on the same floor as me. It was a late Tuesday evening. Rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the bedroom, creating a cozy, muted atmosphere inside. The lights were dimmed, and the air was thick with the heavy, comforting scent of Silas's pheromones, carefully modulated to keep me relaxed. I was lying on my side, propped up by a small mountain of silk pillows, wearing nothing but one of Silas's oversized black shirts. My breathing was shallow, my hands resting protectively over the massive, stretched curve of my stomach. The pup was incredibly active tonight, rolling and kicking with a terrifying, Enigma-level strength that visibly distorted my skin. He's restless, Silas murmured. He was sitting behind me on the bed, his back resting against the headboard. He had pulled me flush against his chest, his strong legs bracketing mine. His large hands were draped over my stomach, constantly moving, rubbing soothing, warm circles over the tight, aching muscles. He's running out of room, I groaned softly, wincing as a sharp kick landed squarely against my lower ribs. Silas, I swear, he's practicing martial arts in there. It feels like he's trying to claw his way out. Silas chuckled, a deep, vibrating sound that rumbled delightfully against my back. He leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to the back of my neck, right over my scent gland. He is an S-tier Enigma heir, Julian. He is meant to be powerful, Silas said, his voice dripping with unmistakable pride. He shifted one of his hands, pressing gently against the spot where the pup had just kicked. Immediately, the baby responded, pushing back against Silas's palm from the inside. It was a strange, beautiful game they played. The pup already recognized his sire's touch, calming down instantly whenever Silas asserted his presence. "I am so tired, Papa," I whispered, the pet name slipping out naturally. My eyelids were drooping, the exhaustion settling deep into my bones. Silas's arms tightened around me at the sound of the word. The possessive, loving warmth radiating from him spiked dramatically. "I know, my beautiful Alpha," Silas murmured, his lips trailing softly along my jawline. "We are almost there. Just a few more weeks. You have been so strong, Julian. Stronger than I could have ever imagined. I am so incredibly proud of you." I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against his shoulder, letting the deep, steady rhythm of his heartbeat lull me toward sleep. The corporate wars, the rivalries, the boardrooms, they all felt like they belonged to a different lifetime, a different universe. Here, in the dark, held securely in the arms of the man I loved, with our child fighting for space beneath our intertwined hands, I finally understood what true power felt like. It wasn't money. It wasn't stock options. It was this. But as my breathing evened out and sleep began to claim me, a sudden, strange pressure gathered at the very base of my spine. It wasn't the sharp, violent agony of the attack from 2 months ago. It was a deep, heavy, undeniable pulling sensation, like the tide slowly dragging the ocean floor. I ignored it, burrowing deeper into Silas's warmth. It was probably just another false alarm, another ache to add to the endless list of third trimester miseries. I had no idea that our quiet, peaceful sanctuary was about to be shattered, and that the ultimate test of our bond was only hours away. End of Part 7. Part 8. The Greatest Legacy. The heavy, dragging pressure at the base of my spine didn't fade. As the hours crept past midnight and the rain continued to lash against the penthouse windows, the dull ache slowly transformed into a rhythmic, inescapable tightening that wrapped around my entire abdomen. I tried to breathe through it, biting my lower lip to keep from waking Silas. He was sleeping so peacefully, his massive arms still draped protectively over my waist, his face buried in the crook of my neck. He had been running a global empire and managing my volatile alpha pregnancy on less than 4 hours of sleep a night. He needed the rest. But my body had other plans. A sudden, sharp contraction seized me, so intense and breathtaking that my entire body went rigid. I couldn't stop the sharp, agonizing gasp that tore from my throat. My hands flew to my stomach, gripping the silk sheets as a rush of warm fluid suddenly soaked the mattress beneath me. My water had broken. Before my gasp even finished echoing in the dark room, Silas was awake. The transition from deep sleep to lethal, hyper-aware enigma predator took less than a millisecond. "Julian." Silas was up, the bedside lamp flickering on, casting a warm, urgent glow over the bed. His dark eyes instantly scanned my pale, sweating face, his nostrils flaring as he caught the sudden, sharp spike of distressed orchids in my scent. "What is it? Is it the pain again?" "Silas," I breathed out, my voice trembling as the contraction slowly released its iron grip, leaving me gasping for air. I looked up at him, my eyes wide with a mixture of terror and absolute awe. "It's time. The pup, he's coming." For exactly 2 seconds, the mighty Silas Vance, the ruthless CEO who had crushed entire economies, looked completely, utterly terrified. He stared at my stomach, then back at my face, his enigma brain momentarily short-circuiting at the reality that the moment had actually arrived. Then, the absolute commander returned. "Security. Prepare the transport immediately. Inform Dr. Eris we are inbound." Silas roared toward the smart speaker, his voice booming through the penthouse. He didn't waste a single second. He practically tore the closet doors open, grabbing a thick cashmere blanket. He wrapped it securely around my trembling body, scooping me up into his arms as easily as if I were weightless. "I've got you," Silas chanted, his jaw set in stone as he carried me toward the private elevator. His heavy pheromones of dark smoke and whiskey flooded the air, an aggressive, biological shield meant to keep my panic at bay. "Breathe, Julian. I am right here. You are safe." The ride to the clinic was a blur of flashing lights and agonizing pain. The contractions were hitting me in rapid succession, tearing through my alpha biology with a ferocity that left me sobbing into Silas's chest. Every time a wave of pain crested, Silas would tighten his grip, pressing his lips to my forehead, murmuring desperate, grounding words of devotion against my skin. When we burst through the doors of the private medical facility, Dr. Eris and his elite surgical team were already waiting. "The Enigma Sire's pup is presenting early, but vitals are incredibly strong," Dr. Eris announced, moving with practiced urgency as I was transferred to the delivery bed. The sterile, bright lights of the trauma suite were blinding. Julian, your body is fully prepared. But as an alpha, your pelvic structure is going to fight this. You have to rely on Silas's pheromones to force your muscles to submit. Don't leave me, I begged, my fingers digging like talons into Silas's forearm as another monstrous contraction ripped through me. I was completely stripped of my corporate armor. I was just a man, terrified and in agony, desperately clinging to his mate. I am not going anywhere, Silas swore, his voice fierce and unwavering. He stripped off his suit jacket, throwing it onto the floor, and climbed onto the edge of the medical bed right beside me. He gathered my upper body into his arms, letting me use his broad chest as a brace. I am right here, Julian. I will not let you fall. The next few hours were a grueling, primal battle. The physical toll of an alpha bringing life into the world was staggering. The pain was an all-consuming fire. I screamed, I cursed, I begged for it to end, burying my face into Silas's neck as my body tried to tear itself apart. And through it all, Silas was my anchor. He bathed me in his enigma scent, constantly wiping the sweat from my brow, whispering how strong I was, how beautiful I was, how much he loved me. One final push, Julian, Dr. Eris commanded, his voice cutting through the haze of my exhaustion. The head is clear. Give me everything you have left. You can do this, my heart, Silas urged, his hands gripping my shoulders, his own face pale and shining with sweat. Bring our son into the world. Now, Julian. I squeezed my eyes shut, drawing on the very last reserve of my alpha strength, and pushed with a guttural, desperate cry that echoed off the sterile walls of the clinic. Suddenly, the agonizing pressure vanished. A profound, echoing silence descended over the room for one terrifying heartbeat. And then, the silence was shattered by a sound that instantly rewrote the universe. It was a loud, demanding, furious cry. The cry of life. I collapsed back against Silas's chest, my lungs burning, my entire body shaking with exhaustion. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down my face. He is here, Dr. Eris said, a wide, genuine smile breaking across his face. He expertly cleared the pup's airways. And judging by the immediate, overwhelming pheromone spike in this room, gentlemen, congratulations. You have a perfectly healthy, incredibly robust S-tier alpha boy. Silas didn't say a word. I felt the massive enigma beneath me trembling violently. I slowly turned my head, looking up at him. Silas Vance was crying. The terrifying apex predator, the man who had never shown an ounce of vulnerability to the world, had tears silently cascading down his sharp cheeks. His dark eyes were fixed on the tiny, squirming bundle in the nurse's arms, completely mesmerized. Silas, I whispered weakly, reaching up with a trembling hand to touch his jaw. He looked down at me, and the sheer magnitude of the love in his eyes practically stole the breath from my lungs. He leaned down, pressing his lips to mine in a kiss that tasted of salt and absolute, unwavering devotion. Thank you, Silas choked out, his voice breaking entirely. Thank you, Julian. For my life. For my world. The nurse approached slowly, carefully placing the warm, clean bundle into my exhausted arms. I looked down at our son. He was small, his face flushed red from crying, with a shock of thick, dark hair that perfectly mirrored Silas's. As I gently brushed my thumb over his tiny, incredibly soft cheek, his crying slowly ceased. He instinctively rooted toward my scent, his tiny fingers reaching out to curl tightly around my thumb. He's beautiful, I sobbed, pulling the bundle closer to my chest. He looks exactly like you. Silas carefully wrapped his massive arms around both of us, resting his chin on my shoulder to look down at his heir. The tiny alpha pup immediately calmed under the heavy, protective blanket of his Enigma sire's pheromones. Roman, Silas whispered softly, naming him without a second of hesitation. Roman Vancethorn. I smiled through my tears, leaning my head against Silas's. Roman. It's perfect. 3 months later. If the financial world thought they were shocked by the merger of Vance Global and Thorn Industries, they were absolutely paralyzed by what followed. The terrifying enigma, Silas Vance, and the ruthless alpha, Julian Thorn, had completely disappeared from the corporate war zone. The empires were running smoothly under the guidance of our elite boards, but the kings had abdicated their thrones for something far more important. The warm, salty breeze of the Miami coast gently rustled the sheer white curtains of our private, ultra-luxury beachfront villa. The ocean stretched out endlessly before us, a brilliant, glittering sapphire under the afternoon sun. I stepped out onto the expansive wooden balcony, holding 2 glasses of iced tea. I was wearing loose linen pants and an unbuttoned white shirt, my alpha physique slowly returning, though the sharp, aggressive edges of my past life were permanently gone. I stopped in the doorway, completely captivated by the scene unfolding on the balcony. Silas, wearing nothing but swimming trunks and a pair of dark sunglasses, was pacing slowly back and forth near the railing. Strapped securely to his massive chest in a high-end baby carrier was Roman. The 3-month-old S-tier alpha was fast asleep, his tiny cheek pressed firmly against Silas's pectoral muscle, completely dead to the world. Surrounding the perimeter of the beach, discreetly hidden among the palm trees, were no less than 20 heavily armed Vance global security contractors. I laughed softly, the sound catching Silas's attention. I walked over, handing him a glass of tea. "You know Vance," I teased, leaning my hip against the railing. "The great Enigma CEO has officially been reduced to a full-time, overglorified baby guard. I think your reputation is permanently ruined." Silas took the glass, completely unfazed by my teasing. He carefully adjusted the strap of the carrier with one finger, ensuring Roman's head was perfectly supported. "My reputation means absolutely nothing to me, Julian," Silas replied, his voice a low, smooth rumble. He looked down at the sleeping pup with an expression of profound softness that still managed to take my breath away every single time I witnessed it. "I am guarding the only thing that matters. And the 20 armed mercenaries hiding in the bushes?" I raised an eyebrow, gesturing to the beach. "Don't you think that's a bit excessive for a private island?" "They are protecting the perimeter," Silas stated casually, taking a sip of his tea. "Someone has to ensure my husband and my son are entirely undisturbed. If a seagull looks at either of you the wrong way, I will have it shot out of the sky." I burst out laughing, stepping closer to him. The heavy, comforting scent of dark smoke and whiskey wrapped around me, instantly making me feel at home. I reached out, gently stroking Roman's dark hair, before letting my hand rest flat against Silas's chest. "You are a terrifying man, Silas Vance," I murmured, looking up into his dark, loving eyes. "Only to the rest of the world," Silas replied softly. He set his glass down on the railing and wrapped his free arms securely around my waist, pulling me flush against him and the sleeping baby between us. He leaned down, pressing a slow, deep, breathtaking kiss to my lips. It was a kiss that held the weight of all our past hatred, our fierce rivalry, and the incredible, impossible love that had blossomed from it. I closed my eyes, melting into his embrace, listening to the gentle rhythm of the ocean waves and the soft, synchronized breathing of my Enigma husband and our alpha son. If someone had told me a year ago that a positive pregnancy test would destroy my empire, I would have killed them. But as I stood there in the arms of my greatest enemy turned soulmate, I realized the truth. The pregnancy hadn't destroyed my empire. It had finally given me a reason to build a real one. End of story. Hello everyone. Welcome back to the Your BL Boyfriend channel. Today, we are diving deep into the breathtaking, epic 8-part story of Julian Thorne and Silas Vance. From a ruthless rivalry to a love grand enough to take on the world, I'm sure this journey made all of your hearts race. But what exactly made this story so striking and addictive? Let's take a look behind the scenes of this passionate universe together. The greatest strength of this story was how it completely shattered the classic damsel in distress trope. Julian Thorne is no ordinary character. He is a ruthless, proud alpha CEO who refuses to bow down and is used to keeping everything under his absolute control. For a character holding such power to be forced to surrender to his own biology and to an enigma was not just a physical transformation, but an incredible psychological war. While Julian's pregnancy might have looked like a weakness or a downfall from the outside, as the story progressed, we saw that it was the ultimate proof of his true strength and resilience. Moving on to Silas Vance. Silas was the absolute peak of the protective and possessive lover trope. When he isolated Julian from the outside world, he essentially locked him in a cage. But this cage wasn't made of iron. It was made of pure gold. That was exactly what the golden handcuffs dynamic was all about. Silas didn't strip Julian of his company or his power. Instead, he built a massive, impenetrable wall around that empire. Silas's love was dark, intense, dominant, and intoxicating. Julian, forced to share a home with his sworn enemy, choosing to surrender to that absolute safety Silas offered rather than tearing those walls down, was the most beautiful indicator of how their bitter hatred transformed into a passionate bond. The biggest turning point of the story was definitely that infamous balcony scene and what happened right after. Marcus Sterling's cowardly attack fully unleashed the predatory, ruthless enigma inside Silas. But the real magic happened in the hospital room. This pregnancy, which had seemed like a crisis to be managed or a biological obligation up until that moment, turned into pure, unshakable love the second they heard that tiny heartbeat on the ultrasound screen. The moment Julian stripped off all his invincible alpha armor and told Silas, "I need you," was the moment the Ice King completely melted, realizing that their true kingdom was the love they had for each other. In the finale on the Miami beach, seeing these two powerful men, who once wanted to destroy each other, living a peaceful life with their little son Roman, showed us that the greatest empire of all is family. This story, which started with hatred and rivalry, ended by proving that there is no force in the universe stronger than a father protecting his family. Which scene affected you the most in this story? Were you drawn more to Silas's intense, breathtaking protectiveness, or Julian's unshakable pride that stood strong despite everything? Let's definitely meet in the comments. I'll be reading all of them. If you want more of these passionate, highly thrilling, and immersive BL stories and analyses, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Your BL Boyfriend channel. Make sure to turn on your notification bell so you don't miss out on new stories and characters. Take great care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story. Bye for now.